Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the next installment in the 2023 Sotterley Presents People and Perspectives. My name is Nancy Easterling, and it is my honor to serve as the Executive Director of Historic Sotterley. We are so grateful. We realized today that it's been 18 years since we restarted speaker presentations at Sotterley. And during that time, we've had so many different wonderful presenters. We have had people from history, preservation, the environment, social and racial equity, so many different topics. And I know that you are going to be as thrilled with our presenter tonight as I am. I've had such a joy being able to meet her, and I just can't wait to meet her in person rather than just on the screen. Before I read her bio, though, let me just say thank you to everybody on the screen and in our community that help us with all of our work and with all of our mission, our many corporate partners and all of our supporters. If you're not a member or supporter yet and you love the work we're doing, think about joining the family. One more little admin piece, please, as you're hearing this wonderful presentation tonight, do put your questions in the Q&A section of the chat. And we would love for you to sign into the chat tonight and let us know where you're joining us from tonight. We usually have people from all over the U.S. and sometimes even outside. So we'll look forward to seeing where you're from. So I had the joy of meeting our presenter here virtually the other day, but we on phone calls. But I was tipped off. Oops, guys, I'm sorry. I don't know why my screen just did that, but just keep listening to me and you're seeing Imani. Why don't we just make Imani big right now? You don't need to see me. I'll just give you her bio as everybody's listening. So Imani was born and raised on the eastern shore of Maryland in Chestertown. She's always had a passion for restoration and conservation since she was a young girl and found great interest in the rapidly growing shellfish aquatic industry after completing an aquaculture training program at Virginia Institute of Marine Science in 2016. Since then, Imani has worked on oyster farms, nurseries, and hatcheries along the eastern shore of Virginia and Maryland from 2018 to 2020. She was the assistant hatchery manager for Hooper's Island Oyster Company, having the opportunity to work in all aspects of shellfish grow-out. Through her love for her career, Imani founded Minorities in Aquaculture, a nonprofit organization that strives to empower and support women of color in the aquaculture industry by educating women of traditional waterman legacy and heritage in coastal communities, while providing opportunities such as paid internship, technical skills, training, and career development resources in the new wave of commercial fisheries. In addition to developing the nonprofit, Imani is also pursuing a master's degree in the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, researching the historical minority engagement in commercial fisheries in the Chesapeake Bay. And knowing how busy she is, I've decided she just doesn't even sleep at night. So Imani, take it away. We can't wait to hear about your work and all that you're doing. Oh, Imani, we cannot hear you. Are you on mute, hon?
There we go. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for the bio and the introduction. I'm so excited to be here and just share a little bit about my work and my research, just touching on the things that you just heard in my bio. So I appreciate everyone being here this afternoon. So I'm going to start my presentation. Okay. All right, so this presentation is usually a variation of presentations that I give. I have had the opportunity to speak all over the world in the last 3 years, and so this presentation is, gets very specific for each region that I'm in, and it's always very, comforting and very encouraging to have, do a presentation in front of people from, Maryland, especially from Maryland, Chesapeake Bay watershed area, but also people who don't really know about minorities, aquaculture, or myself. So to start us off, a little bit about me. I'm originally from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, like it was said in my bio. And I really did grow up, really understanding the restoration and conservation efforts of the Chesapeake Bay at a very young age. And also, as you heard in my bio, I am a master's student at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences, specifically at the Horn Point Laboratory campus. And that's actually where I did my first math and science, really like restoration of the Chesapeake Bay camp when I was 7 years old in 2003. And now to be a master's student there has really just brought it full circle. And so it was from really that camp that I really had made up in my mind that I wanted to be a marine biologist. I didn't really know what I wanted to do in marine biology. I just knew that I wanted to work out on the water and do, something in that realm. So when I went to Old Dominion University, originally I, was attracted to ODU because I was a Division I 4-year lacrosse player at the university. And so that's what really attracted me. But they also have a really great marine biology program. And but their biology program is more focused on oceanography. And so that was really kind of my first introduction into like saltwater ecosystems and estuaries. And I fully was like, I think this is the path that I want to go down. I think I want to be a tropical biologist. I went all the way, to getting my scuba diving certification, to studying abroad in Southwater Cape Belize, researching sea urchins feeding patterns and all of those other things. And so it was actually that summer that I was in Belize that I realized that, going down sort of this academia route maybe wasn't for me at the time. And really, I didn't want to be a professor. I really wanted to work with my hands. And so that summer I came back home or actually came back to Virginia to ODU because we, doing summer things for lacrosse. And so that's when I started working for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation in their oyster restoration department in Virginia. And that was the very first day. I will never forget it. I, was covered in mud from head to toe. We had just planted oysters and talked to the community and different things like that. And I remember sitting in my car at the end of that day and just being like, yeah, like this is what I want to do, I think, for the rest of my life and, for a career. And so from there, I had always had dreamed of working with Chesapeake Bay Foundation, but my boss at the time was like, have you ever heard of aquaculture? And when I was working there, we were stationed out of Virginia Institute of Marine Science, where I ended up being a oyster aquaculture training program intern for that following summer after I graduated my undergrad. And so that was my first introduction into aquaculture. And it was, really sort of just like my first hands-on experience, in the hatchery, in the nursery, on the farms, different things like that. And so the rest is sort of history when it comes to my aquaculture career. After I left and finished my OAT program, I went on to work at another oyster company in the area for about a year, and then came back to Maryland and started working for Poplar Island as an environmental specialist, and wasn't really doing much of aquaculture. And so that's really when you're out of an industry that you really feel like you are a part of, and when you're not in it, I was really itching to get back. And so so then I got back into aquaculture, and I started working for Hooper's Island Oyster Company as their assistant hatchery manager, and really got to grow my skills on all different sides of the process that I'll go over in the later slides. So moving on to, what is even aquaculture? Because I get that question a lot, and it seems a little complicated, but it's really not, especially if you're looking at the screen right now. But aquaculture in the basic terms is basically just ocean farming. So the same ways that we farm in agriculture with our crops and our livestock is the exact same way that we do that with seafood. And so there are many different ways that you can do it, many, different ecosystems that you have to have gear for, and, what your business and facilities can hold and different things like that. And really what your purpose, in the process that you're doing aquaculture. But it's really, in the simplest terms, it's just the ocean farming of our seafood resources. So the hatchery part of the aquaculture process is the very first step. And so the easiest way to think about this in this breakdown, so there's hatchery, nursery, and farm. So there's three. And so if you think about hatchery as babies, nursery is teenage oysters, and farm is adult oysters. And those adult oysters are the ones that everyone loves to eat on half shell. You get on your plates at restaurants, different things like that. So in the baby stage, this is where we're really trying to mimic the natural processes of what oysters would naturally do in the wild. So oysters are natural broadcast spawners, which is why they're in oyster reefs. So being in oyster reefs are actually something that helps their community. They love being all together in one spot because that is the way that they can reproduce. So if we are in a room all together and I'm like, well, I think I'm ready to spit out my eggs, so then I'll spit mine out. And then if all of the other people, oysters next to me, sense that from me, they're like, oh, well, if she's ready to go, well, I think I'm ready to go too. And that's when they all start spitting out eggs or sperm, and the wave action is what fertilizes them and then carries them onto pilings and different things like that. So baby oysters are very microscopic in the beginning, but they're also free swimming. So as you can see in this photo to my left, those are baby oysters under the microscope. They are free swimming. They have two shells. You can see the dark part of the inside of the shell. That's actually their stomach. So you can see they're nice and healthy. They've been eating. And then the picture of the sieve with the drain is actually what they would look like to our naked eye. So not under the microscope. So they're super tiny, but basically what we do is we mimic that process, but we also control it in a way. And so we put the adult oysters in what we call a broodstock system, and we actually, put the temperature up into summer temperature water levels. So we start up that process in January. And so once we put them in the system, we just flood them with food. So they're getting about 10 to 15% at any given time of food that we're just pumping into that system. And the reason why that we do that is because starting in March, when the water's starting to get a little warm, more food, more microalgae, more bacteria, things like that are starting to grow. Chesapeake Bay is starting to become a little bit more lively, and that's when oysters are really packing on that energy and in that food to be able to create eggs and sperm so that when summertime comes, they're ready to reproduce. And so in the hatchery, we actually create that food. So all these beautiful colors that you see up here are just different systems of bags of microalgae that we grow. And so, like I said, we mimic exactly what's happening in the Chesapeake Bay. So we're growing all of the major microalgae that you would find in the Chesapeake Bay that oysters in the wild would eat. So if you think about it, in the beginning, we're feeding them, baby food consistency type algae, very small cells so that they can really pack it in. And as they get older, we can get a little bit more creative and put like cake and burgers and milkshakes and all of the fun, foods like foods that we enjoy. We pump them with those things so that we can get them to setting, which is the next part of the process, which is the nursery. So this is really where the two kind of separations of restoration and commercial really separate in the nursery. So once oysters get to what we call full, like mature larval stage, which is called pettivelager, you don't have to remember that, but just full larval stage, they want to set on something and they want to, be oysters. So they want to set on something for the rest of their life. And so that's why you see, oysters on pilings and different things like that. And so when we are looking at the commercial side, restaurants and also people that love oysters don't want clusters. They want nice, healthy, individual cup-sized oysters. And so in that process, we actually grind up old oyster shell. We put it at the bottom of a sieve like this. And those baby oysters that you just saw on the first slide, those tiny grains of sand will be like huge rocks to them. And so each individual oyster will find its own rock in that way, and they will set on that little tiny piece of sand, and then they will become individual oysters. That one little piece of sand will become a part of their shell. And so you'll never be able to tell after that, but there'll be individual oysters there. On the restoration side, aquaculture is, hugely important as well in that production, because instead of grinding up those old shells, we just place those baby oysters on old shells, basically creating starter reefs. So when you see Chesapeake Bay Foundation or Oyster Recovery Partnership or any of those other organizations that are doing great oyster planting work in the Chesapeake Bay, they're using spat on shell, which is basically starter reefs that they're putting out into the water so that the oysters, you'll have one oyster shell that will have 4 or 5 individual baby oysters on that shell, and that is a reef within itself. So imagine putting millions of shells out. You're just creating mini systems within a huge viable system to have a healthy, really active oyster reef. And then in the last stage is really the grow out stage. So this is where, they've gotten through the nursery, they've gotten to about, probably like 1.5 inches, 2 inches in size. And so they're big enough to kind of just do what they do. So this is where we put out all of our oysters onto the farm. And so on average, a Maryland oyster farmer puts out individually by themselves 2 million individual oysters in their area of the Chesapeake Bay. And so even though those oysters aren't there for the entirety of their life for many, many years, because they're cycling through, getting on your dinner plates, filling, or chucking orders, things like that. And one individual oyster at their adult stage, which is about 3 inches or so, filters up to 50 gallons of water a day. So if each individual oyster farmer in Maryland, or even, around the country, is putting about 2 million individual oysters a day, that's a lot of water that's been filtering and cleaned up and really just put out in a very healthy way by those oysters, no matter how long they've been there, even if it was a couple months or a year or anything like that. And so on the farm, it's really about what is the farmer's choice, what's really going to work for your environment. So I have 3 different, types of grow out systems here. I've got baskets that are more water column. So they, those are called long line systems. So an oyster farmer that has, a more water column lease, they would more go towards that. Something that where the tide goes down, they can walk out, take the bags off, do what they need to do. And by the time the tide comes back in, the oysters are back in their baskets, all clean and happy and things like that. Then there's also the cage systems where, we put oysters in those cages. They're floating cages. They're all connected together out onto a lease. And then we have rack and bag, which is also a very shallow water type of system where the tide is going out. And as you can see, you can walk out, pick the bags up, shake them, clean them, do what you need to do before the tide comes back in. So it's really dependent on what does the farmer, what resources do they have in their area, and what is going to grow the best for the oysters, but also for maintenance in that area too, depending on weather conditions, water conditions, current, different things like that. So overall, aquaculture, like I said, is a growing industry, and it's something that a lot of people think is really intricate in a lot of ways. But like I said, it's very simple. It's just ocean farming of our seafood resources. But even something so simple is very integrated and very connected into everybody's life, whether you know it or not. So aquaculture is a growing industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry right now, where we are bringing in 84% of our seafood resources are being imported into the United States, and about 60% of that are coming from aquaculture all over the world. So aquaculture isn't something new. It's something that's been, happening all over the world for a while. But over the last couple of years, especially when we've gotten into food insecurity and different things like that, and our oceans and wild populations really fluctuating because of climate change, over harvesting, habitat degradation, all of those things, aquaculture has been introduced into a lot of areas, especially the Chesapeake Bay. That is really the origin story of Maryland getting into oyster farming, is because we had a huge decline of oysters, getting us down to 1% of our historic oyster population in the Chesapeake Bay. And aquaculture was introduced in the 90s to be able to not only replenish and restore the wild population, but also to keep up with the commercial command of oysters. Everyone loves oysters. Maryland, Chesapeake Bay, anybody that's from a coastal community, that seafood is a huge part of the culture that is a part of your community. And so aquaculture is just, in my eyes, really just a teammate in that wild population. As we're trying to get the wild populations at a steady rate, at a viable rate, aquaculture is there where we don't have to go out into the natural resource. We don't have to disrupt what's happening in the wild populations of what we're trying to grow. We're just growing food, and we're growing it in a really sustainable way that's not only, helping ecologically, but it's also helping us with our food security around the world as well. So when you go to the grocery store, a lot of people don't really realize, even in the frozen section, especially the frozen section, you are probably eating farmed fish, salmon, trout, halibut, oysters, farmed oysters. But I also want to say that farmed isn't bad. I get that question a lot. I know there's a lot of information out there about how aquaculture is bad and how it's being, really horrible to our ecosystem. And as a person who is fully integrated into aquaculture, I can be completely transparent and say that there are a lot of sectors of aquaculture that aren't doing what they could be doing for our environment and for the communities that could be benefiting from those resources. Finfish aquaculture is one of our kind of newest sectors in the United States when it comes to aquaculture. It's something that, has the ability to feed millions of people for, and being really the focal point of our sustainable seafood resource. But there's a lot of things that need to be worked out. There's a lot of, offshore aquaculture that's now coming to the conversation. But when it comes to oysters are actually the most sustainable protein on the planet. And that's not only by the caloric, sort of intake that we get and the nutrients that we get from eating oysters, but also when it comes to oyster farming, that's the most sustainable aquaculture sector in the world right now. So oyster farmers, they're all over the place right now. It's a really growing industry. And so supporting them, especially in the United States, can not only increase our aquaculture industry in the United States, but it also can enhance and empower our food security. Because when we think about historically, which I'll get into a little bit, and you guys will understand, I'm a little bit of a history nerd when it comes to seafood. But oysters were not a high commodity. They were not a rich person's type of meal to eat. Seafood in general, I mean, lobsters are, astronomical in prices right now, but back then they were called the bugs of the sea, and oysters were a poor man's food. And so when we look at that and we look at where our seafood industry has gone and how disconnected that we really are with our seafood industry, it's something that aquaculture has the ability to, if we build it from where it is now into the future, to not only bring us back socially and culturally, but get seafood back into backyards and barbecues and different things like that. Right now, there is, this perception that you have to eat seafood in a fancy restaurant, at a white tablecloth restaurant, to have oysters or whatever. And I got to tell you guys, I can't remember the last time I had an oyster in a restaurant. I am a oyster backyard type of gal. And I really think that once I, picking those oysters up from the farmers themselves, really understanding and knowing what, how they're being treated, and really trusting them with my seafood, and understanding the process that has to happen for them to, for me to receive a bag of oysters, I take a lot of pride in that. And I can really taste that in the oysters that, I eat and the people that I support in the aquaculture industry. And so getting into this historic decline, and especially in the Chesapeake Bay, like I said, it was something that really was detrimental to our seafood industry. At one point, we had a very prominent and very dominant seafood industries, from crabs to striped bass to oysters, to kind of, anything that we are sort of, we're getting in the Chesapeake Bay, sturgeon, different things like that, that have really either collapsed altogether or are rapidly declining or have been fluctuating over the last couple of years. And so, when I look at that also, I don't just look at the seafood, I also look at the entirety of the occupation of being a waterman on the Chesapeake Bay has also drastically declined in a lot of ways. A lot of watermen are, not having the same same viable success that they were years ago, or it's fluctuating, and that's correlating with what's happening in the fisheries. And so, that's really what I'm interested in, is really like, how have we looked at the really huge historical events when it comes to habitat destruction and overfishing in the Chesapeake Bay? We know a lot of information about what's happening ecologically in the Chesapeake Bay, but not a lot of people have looked at what's happening or what's happened socially on the Chesapeake Bay in those coast communities. So that's really what I'm interested in. And so getting into that, like I said, we had a very tight-knit seafood industry when it came to Chesapeake Bay. And again, in a lot of coastal communities, it's like that as well. And it didn't just start being like that. That's something that is really ingrained into our heritage and legacy when it comes to the Chesapeake Bay. And that's really what makes, that's really what Maryland and a lot of places are really known for, is their seafood. And it's really the people that have been working in that industry that have been making that history. And so for me specifically, I have been really looking at and been really interested in the African Americans that have been working in the Chesapeake Bay. And over, since 2020, there's been a huge resurgence of interest in the African American, maritime occupation, legacy, and history. And for me, in 2020, that's really when I started to dive deep into this, history as well. I come from a 200-year-long line of oyster of watermen on the Chesapeake Bay, from Rockall to Crisfield. We can date that back to the early 1800s, and I knew that growing up. Probably about 15 or 16, my mom was really into genealogy, but it wasn't until 2020 that I had gone through my own, oyster farming career for, 6 years at that point, and then really started to just piece together, oh my God, well, where are these people and all of these different things? And, oh my God, this is what, my family did. It skipped a lot of generations to get to me, but really, when I looked back at my own family lineage, I was like, oh wow, it's what I'm doing. I always didn't know where it fit and where and why I was doing it, but I'm really bringing my family back home into a space that we once were in, prominently as an occupation. And so that kind of goes with a lot of, African Americans and just people of color in general. On the slide before, I had a picture of Indigenous people, because they really were the starters of the commercial fishing industry, eating seafood consistently in their diets, really building the commercial fisheries that we know now. Enslaved Africans being after that, being pushed to the water's edge, by their slave masters, by, really people of color, being really looked at, being downplayed and put towards the water's edge, as it, was looked at as, again, a poor man's thing. But now if we look at, history or the years as, history has gone on, now there are multi-million-dollar homes on the water. So the perception has changed a lot. And I got really interested in, well, how did that change? That didn't just change overnight. What were the domino effects to that? And so that's really what's driven me. Another thing that's really driven a lot of the work that I've done is the women of color specifically. And I'm really a gal's gal. And what that really means is that I love, really championing for other women. And I love when other women really start breaking the norm, especially as an African American female in a white dominated field of aquaculture. We don't have, for a very long time until 2020. And like I said, I had been in aquaculture at that point for 6 years. I had never worked with another woman of color in my entire space that I had been in. It wasn't until 2020 that I went into upstate New York and worked at a fish hatchery, the largest fish hatchery in the United States, that I met my very first African-American female that was a nursery manager at that fish hatchery and had been there for at least 15 years. And she was from Jamaica. And that, even though we didn't work on the same shifts some of the times and things like that, I just felt so at ease when I saw her there, and just knowing that she was there. And so really understanding where women have really fit in the seafood industry has been just something that's really driven my work, like I said, because not only have people of color been really instrumental in building the commercial fish industry, but also women around the world are still at the backbone and at the forefront of our seafood industry without much data or documentation of where they are, who they are, and what their contributions have been over the last over the last few decades. And so really, a lot of my homage is not just towards, people of color, but towards the women of color that we're in the shucking houses, we're in the packing houses, that we're, that are still crabbing, picking crabs and different things like that, that are, overseas, that are, in the beginning stages of our seafood that comes over into the United States that we don't even know. Their hands are touching our food and our resources, and they should be honored for that, for their hard work. And so for me, that's those two things have built the things that I'm going to talk about in the next couple of slides. So just kind of overall, with kind of combining all of those things that I just talked about, 1 out of 4 women in the marine biology industry or 1 out of 4 people are women in the marine biology industry. And again, like, aquaculture is a heavily white male dominated field. We don't know how many women of color there are in aquaculture. We don't really know how many women there are in aquaculture, what sectors they're in, or anything like that. And so, when we see that, and when I see that, and I really didn't know if like it was just me in the areas that I was in, that I wasn't seeing people of color. I'd only worked with like Hispanic men and African American men at the time, and they were at the lower income, like tech positions or, labor positions that I had worked in. And to me, they were the smartest people, on the farm. And so then when I really was like, oh, well, like, where are the women of color? No one could really give me an answer. So in 2020, when I really kind of looked at all of this, I started asking people in aquaculture from all over the world of, who do you know that's a person of color that's in a leadership role in aquaculture? And no one could give me a name. Not a single person could give me a name. They were like, other than you, I don't know anybody off the top of my head. And that was super concerning to me. But really what was concerning when I looked at not just like where I was and, what, my role was in aquaculture, but again, when I looked back at the history of the Chesapeake Bay and of people of color, especially African Americans, and just understanding that we were really the starter, we built the room when it comes to commercial fishing in the United States and in the Chesapeake Bay. When I looked at the numbers now, we only have 9 to 10 active Black captains that are still living on the Chesapeake Bay. And I've met every single one of them. And there are a few, I will say there are a few that come out of the woodworks because they don't know each other. They're not connected with each other. Over the years, they've really lost that connection. But when we think back, there was over hundreds of thousands of African Americans that were working the water. And now we're reduced down to 9 or 10. And all of the ones that are still active on their charter boats, still have charter boat businesses, because I also want to clarify that too. When I say boat captains, I mean commercially working. So like traditional watermen, charter boat captains, people that are making a living from the water. Those are the people that I'm talking about, that marine occupation that we really were prominent in. There's only 9 to 10 of them still living, and they're all over the age of 60. Oldest is 84. With no younger generations coming behind them. I right now am, the youngest African American that's, working on the Chesapeake Bay currently right now. And in 2020, a lot of people were telling me that, and a lot of people were saying, well, yeah, from Maryland to Texas, I think you're the only African American woman that's in the oyster aquaculture industry. And again, I was in shock, because that's not something that I take very lightly. That's not a title I even want. I don't want to be the only African American woman that's working in oyster aquaculture from Maryland to Texas. And especially, again, looking at the history, I shouldn't be the only African American woman that's working in oyster aquaculture right now. And so it was all of those things that, again, were really the catalyst to all the things that I'm doing today. So 2020, I mean, I like to call it the year of redirection, because even though it was a very tough year for a lot of people, myself included, I lost my job in 2020. I lost my oyster farming job. I'd been there for 2.5 years, and it was a very devastating time, because really I was like, this is what I want to do for the next 15, 20 years. I want to work on a farm. I want to be dirty. I want to be on the water, all of those things. And so again, it was like, all of these catalysts were coming, out of the woodworks in 2020. And really, there were the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, everything as a person of color in that realm really touched me and really moved me in a way that I wasn't truly understanding at the time, but I don't think that I really understood the impact that it was going to have on me. And so in 2020, that's when I started Minorities in Aquaculture. And that's really when I got the idea and started asking people that question of, one, who do you know that's a person of color that's in a leadership role? Who is a oyster farmer owner? Who is a hatchery manager? Who is an assistant hatchery manager? Who's a director of a hatchery? Who's in any of those realms? And when no one could give me a number, I really went on this quest of trying to find just other women of color that were in my space. It really started with just me wanting to find those women of color so that I had a network, so that I could call them and say, this is what happened at work today, and I wouldn't have to explain myself. And so it really started on empowering women of color, connecting with them. And over the last 3 years, it has just exploded from there. And again, in ways that I wasn't truly expecting for it to. Right now, and I didn't know this back then, but we are the only only minority focused organization in the aquaculture industry in the world right now. And that was not something that I was thinking about at my kitchen table when I Googled, how do I start a nonprofit? Honestly, I became a Google scholar. The IRS has checked off all the boxes and says that we're an official 501c3, so I give myself a pat on the back. But it really was just me learning as I was going, and really being driven by this passion and there's this understanding of I have to do something, because not only is our culture and our history going to disappear, along with a lot of things that have already disappeared in Chesapeake Bay, but when it comes to aquaculture, it's going to be the focal point for our sustainable seafood resource by 2030. And there are not many African Americans or people of color in that industry. And so for me, it was, well, if aquaculture is, meant to be a teammate of wild fisheries and commercial fisheries, then should be a no-brainer that, people of color should be, and minorities and underrepresented communities should be a part of it. And so it's really grown into not only, right now we target our women of color for, a bunch of different things, but also we're really being an advocate for all of the underrepresented demographics, women, women overall, men of color, LGBTQ, disabilities, really everybody, so that there is a person in that seat at the table to really, bring light to all of these different things. We've been having these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and, for decades. This isn't just a new thing that came out in 2020. We've been really talking about environmental justice for decades now, and there's still a lack of diversity in marine biology and on the water and different things like that. And so really I'm trying to just break from the norm and really just try to understand what were the domino effects that got us here, because those identifying and key points are going to be the things that are going to enhance us and empower us to move forward in a more positive way. So when it comes to minorities in aquaculture, like I said, I'm really trying to kind of break the mold when it comes to active minority engagement and, career development. As a woman in general, being on farms and being the only, at times, female on the farm, I wasn't given access to a lot of the same resources that the men were. I mean, as ridiculous as it sounds, at some farms, I wasn't even able to use the pressure washer because I thought I was going to hurt myself. And I'm I played Division I lacrosse for 4 years. I'm sure that I'm a lot stronger than a lot of these people here. I mean, I understand and I can handle exerting my body. I mean, I exerted my body to the highest point of its performance level for 6 hours a day for 4 years of my life. I think I can handle this a little bit. I think I can handle a pressure washer, but that's not an uncommon story that women face on oyster farms or, in the aquaculture industry overall. And so, that's why I really am targeting women of color. I'm really taking just a piece of the pie when it comes to underrepresented demographics, really the one that I sit in, and I'm saying, here's career development resources. So our internship program is dedicated right now, one, due to capacity, because I'm the only full-time employee and have been for 2020 with a few volunteers and a board and things like that. But really it's really just been me full-time. But really I wanted to kind of take a chunk at a time to really ensure that this was going to be something impactful, that this was going to be something long-term and not just something that was here for 2020 or here for a few years. Again, because I understand the weight of this industry. I understand the weight of our engagement and participation. And so our internship program is dedicated to women of color right now, but it's really a time for not only for me to give them career development resources, but to really be an advocate and a resource for the entirety of the aquaculture industry. The aquaculture industry, there's tons of, farmers, institutions, people like that in the industry that come to me and say, I have this really great opportunity, but I really want, to diversify my workforce. And, I've put it out there and I only get the same type of applicants. And so I really sit down with farms and people, and I sit down and I, really look at how they're distributing their, their job postings, what's on their job postings. And one of the things that, was something that seemed so minuscule, but when we understand the social and cultural side of a demographic, it really makes a lot of sense. So I told a lot of people, take off the ability to swim on job postings, right? Because historically, like right now, it's like 60% of African Americans in the United States don't know how to swim. And I had to ask them, I said, is knowing how to swim really what you're asking for? Are you asking for safety on the water and safety on boats? Because those are two different things. So when you say that a requirement to work for you is the ability to swim, you've lost so many demographics. You lost so many people that were like, well, I don't know how to swim and I'm not trying to learn how to swim for this job. But it's really the safety part that we're really meaning in that. And so it's really changing that language and having people understand that it's like tiny things like that that have been inconclusive, that haven't been inviting to people to come to aquaculture. But also, our internship program, we have a salary of $17.50 an hour, and it's only going to grow up from there. One, because I was a little broke little oyster farmer, at one point in my career. And I don't need the women that I'm working with to go through those same struggles. So $17.50 an hour, a livable wage. We cover housing, transportation reimbursement, meals, field gear, any financial things that come up in them getting in their summer internship, we take it out of the equation. We just say, you go to an oyster farm or to an institution or work there for a semester or do whatever you feel like that we can help you with and support you with when it comes to your career development in creating your aquaculture career on your own terms. And let's just take the financial piece out of it and you focus on that. One of the other things that is really kind of, out of the norm is that I encourage multidisciplinary approaches in aquaculture. I don't just think that aquaculture is just about farming or just about, being on the water and things like that. There are a lot of parts of aquaculture, again, it being a multi-million-dollar industry that are going to enhance it, not just being a farmer. We need engineers, we need architects, we need communications and marketing. We need trades. There's so many great, skillful people that have gone to trade school that we could use, electricians, welders, all of those different occupations that could be used in aquaculture, but we focus on the farm aspect. And what I really encourage people in aquaculture to do is look beyond the skills that you're looking for right now and look at what this applicant could really give you that you don't have. We can teach people how to work on a farm. We can teach people how to, drive a boat or pick up a cage or sort oysters. We can teach people those things. But if you have a skillful electrician at your oyster farm that's going to save you time and money when it comes to, machines breaking down or, equipment breaking down, all these different things, that is more valuable over time than them understanding the aquaculture process right off the bat. The more that you integrate their disciplinary approaches into that, the differences and the variations of that, the more they're going to feel that they're anchored into that job and want to know about it and want to just bring more skills into that. The other thing that we do, again, really going into those skills, is we have launched our Minorities on Course program. And so again, really kind of breaking out of those norms. This program is not only incorporating that career development, but also that cultural side as well. So we're working with the again, the 9 or 10 last living Black captains that are still active and working on Chesapeake Bay, I'm actively working with them and creating programs with them to help them continue on their legacy. A lot of them have been wanting to, really get it out there to really help people understand that they're declining, and they, some of them want to retire, but don't want to leave the industry because they know that once they do, that's just another piece of the pie that's just being taken out of our legacy until we've disappeared. And they've all been talking over the last, few decades about what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, and how do they get more younger African Americans and people of color involved. And so, with the help of, Vince Leggett, who is the founder of Blacks of the Chesapeake, Captain Lamont Wright, who is a boat captain out of Kent Narrows, off the hook fishing charter, is his business. The three of us have really been working on creating this program called Minorities on Course that is giving people the resources to get their 100-ton Coast Guard captain's license to, again, enhance their career, to kickstart it. We've had a lot of, this was our first cohort that is on the screen right now. And the gentleman that's in the black shirt, this just goes to show you, one, that we're not only actively, working with the boat captains, but we are really preserving the history here. The gentleman in the black in this picture is the son of one of the last living Black captains. His name is Captain Darrell Roy, and this is Darrell Roy Jr. And so Darrell Roy Jr. had taken the Coast Guard test, the 100-ton captain license test, twice before this program, before he joined our program. And this year, this year he was able to not only graduate with his 100-ton Coast Guard captain's license, but he was also to be able to get his towing license. And now he's in a position to take over his father's business, which he was not in a position to be able to do before. So now that's talking about retirement, not within the next 5 to 10 years, but within the next 2 to 3 years. So it's opportunities like that we were able to provide in our programs, that we want to provide in our programs, so that not only are we preserving this history and legacy with education, with understanding of community in our program, Minorities on Course, we take out, minority focused organizations, minority youth, and really help them understand not only their Chesapeake Bay and their environment, but really help them create a spark of connection when it comes to the Bay. We can't just, create programs about really cool things, right? Like I wouldn't take I wouldn't have the same program of, let's say, an Oyster program. I wouldn't administrate it or do it the same way that I do it in the Eastern Shore of Maryland that I would in the inner cities of Baltimore. Because one, there are two different engagements that go on with oysters and with the water. Inner city of Baltimore, I can't just assume that all of those kids have even seen an oyster or eaten an oyster, or even touched the water or been on the water. So I can't start off with something that is going to feel like a pipe dream. Because when they leave that talk or they leave that classroom, they're not going to see the connections in that every single day. And so I want the way that we can get long-lasting engagement is to build from where they are, from where their understanding is. And so when I, give those talks, I ask them, like, have you ever seen this before? What do you know about it? And, really try to connect it to what they're going to see in everyday life. Where does your water come from when you turn on the sink, when you are in the shower, or when you throw out that plastic water bottle, or you don't pick up that trash that you see on the sidewalk? How does that all affect all the things that I'm trying to do, but also trying to teach you too? So it's really about that connection piece for me. And so in 2020, we were, able to provide 5 fully funded, like I said, internship programs. These are our 5, beautiful first cohort of women, from PhD students, in California and University of Idaho, to women who had never heard of aquaculture before, but now went back to their undergraduate advisors and have switched to aquaculture as their major and want to get into aquaculture more and are exploring it. We've actually had 3 of them that have reapplied for this year's internship. And I'm happy to say that we've fully confirmed this week 11 interns that we're going to fully pay this summer to go have an aquaculture experience. And I'm super excited because not only do we have a variety of different applicants from different, education levels and experience levels and different things like that, different disciplines, but also different locations. So we have Maine, we have Maryland, we have South Carolina, Florida, Alaska, California. Alaska, I'm the most excited about because not only is that an internship, but that is a 13-semester course at University of Alaska Southeast that one of our interns is going to go to and is going to get a aquaculture certification to be able to work in aquaculture in Alaska, to be able to further her career in graduate school and whatever else that she wants to do. That's getting her foot into the door. She just graduated 2 weeks ago, and so she was really looking for a way to get into aquaculture after so many years outside of the classroom and hadn't been successful. And now we were able to partner her with University of Alaska Southeast. And so now she's going to go up to Alaska and not only learn about oysters, but kelp and salmon farming as well. And not only is she going to learn about that, but she's also going to be working with the indigenous peoples that Minorities in Aquaculture is partnering with in Alaska as well. So it really comes full circle, and we're really trying to integrate a lot of different things into our programming. So just, going over, getting to the end of my slides here, but just going over a little bit of the, statistics that, and milestones that we've had over the last, almost 3 years. Will be 3 in October this year. So we have, now these numbers are a little low, but now we have over 160 women of color from all over the world that are a part of our network, that we're engaging with, that we're giving career development advice to and support to and networking to. And we're just supporting them in any way that we can in their aquaculture journey. And again, not just on the East Coast and West Coast of the United States, but we also have international members as well that are a part of our membership. And so that number is just increasingly growing. Just to give you a scale, Minorities in Aquaculture started in 2020 with one member, one. And it's insane that and I can being completely transparent, when we had our first ever official member meeting, we had about, I want to say 40 members that were on the call, and I bawled my eyes out the entire time. It was the most beautiful thing to see something that I had started at my kitchen table, and again started 2020 with one member, to having 40 on the call, and then now seeing over 160 members. It's something that is very tangible for me, but it also just shows the impact of Minorities in Aquaculture and the really necessity for Minorities in Aquaculture getting able to connect with them and talk with them. Last year we were able to raise $52,000 for our programming, not just our internship programs, but our Minorities on Course program as well. We have over 15 partners, or we ended last year with over 15 partners. Now we've increased that to about 30 different aquaculture farmers, institutions, wholesalers, and just different experts in the aquaculture industry all over the world. The bottom number is funny because 30 plus events and conferences. Again, I'm the only full-time employee, so I've gone to 30 plus events and conferences for Minorities in Aquaculture, again, worldwide. And that has just been such a blessing of an experience, because as a small town Eastern Shore girl, I would have never thought at my kitchen table I would have created something that would have taken me to places like Switzerland and California and Hawaii and Alaska and all of these different places, to be asked to be a speaker and to be asked to sit at the table and really advocate for minorities that are in aquaculture and that we want to get into aquaculture. So last year was such a big year for us. That was the start of our programming. But this year, like I said, we have 11 interns that were able to support over 125,000 funding, grants and funding and contributions that we've gotten over the last few months to be able to make that happen. And that events and conferences, I'm sort of taking a little bit of a backseat on that one, not as much, but I am still, a master's student. I am finishing up my master's thesis right now. So I've had to find the balance in between really kind of hanging on to the train that is Minorities in Aquaculture, and then also really, doing all the things that I set out in my thesis as well. And so here are some of our partners. Like I said, it really takes a village to do all the things that we've been doing, not only just, my working board and, the volunteers that we do have, but a lot of great organizations that do see the significance of minorities in aquaculture. And again, a very diverse list of organizations that support us, from, local Maryland organizations to global organizations, to federal organizations, so our list is just consistently growing. And we've really had, we have oyster farmers on here, and those connections are really important to me, because I really do want minorities in aquaculture to be seen not only as a resource for minorities that are in aquaculture, but just the aquaculture industry itself. We really are the only liaison in between, really the bridge that's kind of closing the gap in with knowledge, but then also active minority engagement as well long term. So I'm super proud of that, and I'm super thankful for everybody, individual donors and organizations that have supported minorities in aquaculture over the last almost 3 years. And so just to kind of round it out, I love to kind of end with an action item ending. And so I get up this question a lot about, how can I support minorities in aquaculture if I'm not a woman of color, or if I'm not a person of color, or if I'm not even in aquaculture? And so, by having those conversations over the last 3 years, I really, the word donor wasn't really working for me. I love that people, and obviously as a nonprofit, we really are grateful for the financial support that we get from people. But again, with all of these different approaches that we have, and all these different just outlooks on aquaculture and socially and culturally of commercial fisheries, I really wanted to change that language so that I could just invite everybody into minorities in aquaculture. So now we're not calling people donors anymore. We're calling everybody a champion of MIA. So when you are want to support MIA, you become a champion for us, because that not only goes into the financial support that I was talking about before, but that's also advocating for us. That's also educating people not only about aquaculture and about seafood resources, but then also about what MIA is trying to do to enhance that and to empower that, but also the history as well. So it's all encompassing. It's advocacy, it's education, and it's support. And so if you go to our website, www.mianpo.org, or if you just Google minorities in aquaculture, you'll come up to our website. If you go to the join tab, you can join as to become an MIA champion, where you can sign up for our bi-monthly newsletters, keep up with all the things that MIA is doing, really understand what is kind of going on with our industry and what impacts and accomplishments that we've been having. But then also too, you get to directly see how your support is helping our interns and helping our programming. So we do a lot of member features. So you're learning about all the different 160 members in our network, but also we also do partner spotlights too, because again, it really takes a village. And so we really want to honor them as well. And so, so all of, the contributions and different things that go with being a champion, they support our programs. Again, we've raised over $125,000 in the last few months to be able to have 11 interns, and all of those individual donations, they go toward, and contributions, they go towards getting boots, getting housing, having meals, plane rides to different to their location sites, and really having their entirety of their experience, not only for that summer but also other resources. We have a mini grant program that we do as well, to be able to give resources to our members to be able to go to conferences, again, to enhance their career on their own terms. One conference is $500 for a student rate. I'm just going to pause there. $500 for a student rate. So imagine that's just the conference fees. That's not getting to the conference, the hotel for the conference. That's not anything like that. And so for a student, that's a lot. Or for someone who's starting out in the industry, that's a lot. But the conversations at the conferences that I've been to would be so much more impactful with people that are on the ground in aquaculture. They're not just in research, that are not just from this understanding of aquaculture from that academia lens, but really that would, those are the places where everyone should kind of be there to understand what's happening in aquaculture, to understand what they're doing in aquaculture and how it's fitting into where aquaculture is going. And so we give mini grants to give our members the access to be able to do that. And so your contributions, and contributions over the last 3.5 years have been able to have us, support over 10 individual members to go to these different conferences. But also, we want to have, eventually we want to have our first in-person MIA meeting. We haven't been able to have that again. I'm getting my master's and, the capacity level is a little, all over the place right now, but that is one of our goals at the end of this year, once I sort of get everything together with my thesis. And so all of those things, basically all of the contributions that come into the organization, they are going towards not only our development of our programming, but also the development of our organization as well. I would love to have a team. Imagine, if I can do what I've done in the last 3.5 years by myself, imagine what I could do with 1 or 2 other people that are also working with me full time. And so that's really, a goal for our organization right now. All right. And so that is the end of my presentation. And so I can take any questions. And thank you again so much for hearing all of that and listening to me ramble on for the last several minutes. So thank you so much, everybody.
You are not rambling. I'm going to make you big, though, because everybody wants to see your pretty face while we're taking some of the Q&A. There's some lovely comments in the chat. We even have our dear friend Michael Reed from Southern Maryland News here. Thank you, Michael, for joining tonight. And he was asking your title, but Nikki, our admin behind the scenes, was taking care of that. We do have a few questions already out for everybody, and I did want to go ahead and ask them. There are 2 actually related that I'm going to combine into one. So Amber and Mickey, you guys were asking about why there are so few minorities in the water industries, and one had asked, is it because there are two different questions. So one, is it because African American parents are so much into pushing college for their children these days, as so many other parents are, and what about the expense of living on the waterfront and having resources to access the waterfront?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the things that I, didn't really kind of go into it, but that's one of the things that my research is really looking at right now is the historic involvement of African Americans on the Chesapeake Bay. So really kind of taking a chronological order that I was talking about before, and bringing in kind of the social aspects of those timelines as well, and also what was happening ecologically in that chronological order too. So again, those domino effects of how did we get here to a lack of diversity? And in my research, I found some really interesting things that I don't think a lot of people were thinking of. We really, kind of chalk it up to like racial oppression. But I think one of the things that we haven't really thought of is, how the social aspect of perception has changed. And as you can see, my cat here gets really jazzed when I talk about my research. He hears it all the time. But so it just
Into it.
One of the things is the access to higher education. When we think about that timeline of access to higher education, and also the fluctuation of what was happening in the Chesapeake Bay at the exact same time, the perception changed when it came to, oh, this might not be a viable career that it was for me or my granddad or my great granddad or anybody like that. But also that was a way for us to not only to take it from a necessity to something that could be viable but isn't viable right now. So to that question of, it was parents being like, and this is what I've gotten in my oral histories of my data collection too, a lot of the watermen were like, when I saw that the industry was fluctuating, I told my kids, go off to college, go be a doctor, go be a nurse, like go, stay in school as long as you can. This is not something that I want you to do. It's a very intensive labor job. And so it's really just the social kind of perception that has changed throughout time that's really have just shown African Americans that, oh, like, this isn't something that we have to do anymore. Again, we were pushed to the water's edge. It was a necessity back then. It was a necessity to be on the water. Now it's not a necessity. We can go do other things and make more money, so to speak, off of the water. But then also too, when we look at gentrification, again, a lot of people say, and what I agree with is the racial oppression of gentrification. is totally valid. It's very true. But when we look at, oh, wow, when your dad was here, you left to go get that higher education and didn't come back until your parents were gone. And now you don't have a connection to that place anymore. You haven't been back in years. So you sell the house and you leave and you go and you live your life elsewhere. And then that's how on the water properties, that's how like all of that started to like increase in that fluctuation, because that was the case in a lot of these coastal communities. Bellevue is a great example of that. Kent Narrows is a great example of that. That entire strip of where all of those high, hotels and restaurants, all of that was all an African American fishing community. And now it's not. So those are some of the domino effects that I'm looking at right now. But yeah, that's a really good question, because it's a lot of different things. And I think those are the things I'm really excited to kind of like pinpoint, other than racial oppression.
There was a question just on oystering in general, some oyster knowledge. Do they have water temperature limits for growth or survival? And which I know you have to know, because if you're going to put them out there in the water, you have to know these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when it comes to, the different climate change impacts that have been happening in coastal communities and areas that we put oysters, there have been a lot of different concerns with water temperature, that comes with like harmful algal blooms and, all those different things like that. So yeah, there is a limit, but that consistently changes as the environment changes and as as climate change just sort of fluctuates things. So, like the Alaskan king crab situation, they're still trying to figure that out, but they had to shut down that industry because they just disappeared. We don't know. We're still trying to figure out why that happened, and we're starting to get closer to that answer. But all of those things, really affect, year to year, because the Alaskan king crab industry was viable a couple years before that. And that was an issue before. They never thought about shutting it down. That was the very first time in decades they ever shut down that fishery. So yeah, it just sort of happens kind of year by year, and those regulations and just those parameters just change year by year.
There is a question from Amber that she said, it might sound a little random, but she said, that was her quote, not mine. But she wondered if there were ever pearls that are found in our Chesapeake waters. Is that part of what oystering is here or not?
No. So pearling is not, a huge commodity. In the United States, it's more like in Japan and China and Indonesia. And so it's actually funny because I get that question a lot, but it's more from my family of like, when we gonna start up that pearl business? Like, you got all those oysters out there, like we should start a family pearl business. And I'm like, it's not the way that you're thinking of. Like, I'm just not, you don't just like open up an oyster and just find a pearl. A pearl is actually an irritant that comes through, like, it's a grain of sand that becomes an irritant with underneath, like in like kind of the meat content under the shell. And it's actually a different type of oyster and clam that produces oysters, not the Virginica oysters that we eat on the East Coast.
Now, do I understand correctly that aquaculture uses, is it triploid rather than diploid oysters?
It depends. Yeah, it depends on the farmer. But yeah, so triploid oysters were introduced to concentrate more on the meat content growth in that, really feeding stage of the beginning parts of summer instead of reproduction. So when an oyster reproduces, they lose 90% of their meat content and they get all shriveled up and all those different things because they've put all of that energy into there. And so for triplet oysters, they are, that's really kind of been the push in aquaculture, because they're an all season oyster. There is no months or anything like that when it comes to triplets, because they're not reproducing.
So guys, you just learned so many cool things today. So Ray had a question for us, and Ray was saying, any consideration of recruiting high school students in the kind of work study program as a way of introducing them to potential careers, the science, and the business?
Are we introducing them to other potential careers? I mean, I think that when it comes to that, I think that in our journey of really kind of understanding or having, high schoolers and just people in general understanding the process of getting into marine biology, I think we're just a notch of that. So for me, I really tell them, I'm like, well, there are a multitude of different sectors in aquaculture. You're not going to like all of them, but you get to explore them. like I said, most of my career is in oyster farming, but I did take the chance to go to a fish hatchery. Now I know that scooping out dead fish at 7 a.m. is just not my jam, right? But I would have never known that if I hadn't gone. So I really encourage the exploration of aquaculture in their journey of trying to understand what they want to do in marine biology. So it's just kind of a notch of that, and really helping them understand, well, if I don't like this aspect of aquaculture, what aspects do I like, and how does that kind of go with the other parts of marine biology, and what other careers could I do with that?
So there was Amber popped up for just a second. I thought I saw something from her that said you need to write a book. So maybe you should write a book about all of this.
I've been told that a lot.
Yeah, especially the lost stories and the knowledge. And I know that's part of when you're looking at what you're doing with your masters, so often we just don't want this knowledge lost, or the whole African American aquaculture industry was what Anna was talking about, and to spread the knowledge. So just one more thing for you, because I know you have a lot of free time hours. And by the way, guys, she still coaches lacrosse, in case you didn't catch it. She still coaches girls lacrosse on top of it. So I'm so impressed. So when your interns sign up with you, do they typically know what part of the industry they're interested in, or are they just trying to figure it out?
It's a range. So we have some of our applicants that, are already in aquaculture. Like I said, we had 2 PhD students that were already in there. One of them was actually from Ghana and was at the University of Idaho, and she was studying, a different species of catfish feeding, in aquaculture. Another one was at, UC Davis, and she was studying, sea cucumbers and abalone in aquaculture. And for her specifically, she wanted to come to the East Coast because she had heard about and she had seen what was going on in Maine aquaculture, especially in oysters, and wanted to get that experience. So we, got, and actually Maine, funny enough, has the highest concentration of female oyster farmers in the United States. So it just so happened to work out that I had met all of them in person for the first time at a conference a couple months before that. Then I met with her, and she kind of told me what she wanted to do. The great thing about our internships is that they're very customized, as much as I can, to what the person wants to do or wants to explore. So they, if they're already kind of interested and already want to, know what they want to get into aquaculture, try to make that happen. If they don't, then I just kind of give them a standard internship of working on a farm, going to different other farms and different things like that in the area, so they have an understanding of what is that area's aquaculture like, what is that industry like, what can I learn from that, to just help them kind of get on a path to understanding. So it's a range, but our internship program is very catered to all those different ranges as much as we can.
How are the students finding out about how are they finding out about minorities in aquaculture? Because I know in my nonprofit as well, the biggest challenge sometimes we run into is just gaining awareness of the work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's also one of the kind of out of the box. Actually, I won't say out of the box. It's out of the box to the norm, but to me, it's a little bit. It's long overdue. One of the things that I do with our job postings, one, we have a consistent job board, right? We have standards for that job board. When you fill out that application, there are things that are required for you to put: salary, all of those kind of different things that are just a necessity to know when you're going to take a job. But in our internship program, or, different, job opportunities that I think are really, really great that I would take myself, I go straight to the source. So we have this perception that African Americans, people of color, aren't interested in marine biology, and that's not true. And so specifically, for example, in 2021, we got money from, to have a communications intern, our very first intern that we've ever had. And we wanted to work with one specific, kind of area. And so the funders were like, well, just put it out on your website and just see what happens. And I was like, but that's what we always do. And it never gets filled, right? We want to actually make this impactful. So I went to every single HBCU in Maryland, and I went to their biology department, whether they had a biology department, like specific biology department or not, anything close to that. And I said, hey, this is an opportunity that we have, and this is like all the information for it. Could you put this on whatever? Could you blast this out to your students? Do whatever. Within 24 hours, we had 25 applications from Howard University. It's not like they're not interested. I mean, it was crazy the amount of interest that we got, but we went straight to them. We didn't make them try to find it or try to search for it. We said, here it is, right here, all of it. If you're interested, sign up. And within 24 hours, we had such a huge amount of interest in it. And I think it's really going to them. Again, meeting people where they are in their environmental education, in their understanding of aquaculture, and just really kind of giving them the opportunity to explore it. So not only do I talk to, local high schools, but high schools all over the country, colleges, different, places like that. And I keep up that connection throughout these years. It's not just like a one-time thing. So if I've talked to them or whatever, and I think that, I'm looking for high school students to do X, Y, and Z, or college students or whatever for our internship program, I have a list of people that I've already worked with, and I'm consistently giving them that information just so that they always know.
Well, I don't know about everybody on the call tonight, but if you're not inspired and know that the young people in this world are doing okay, then you haven't been watching. Imani's so impressive, and just somebody who took a love of something, and at a time during the pandemic when it could have been a negative, you've turned it into something incredibly positive and giving people a lot of options they never would have imagined before. And I think that you're giving them the ideas on how they can take leadership roles, not just the roles traditionally held by minorities so often in these industries, which were the baseline, barely getting any money, shuckers and some of the other positions, but taking leadership roles that can drive the industry to create a more sustainable future. And just like within the waterman industry, I think there are so many trying to get the next generation interested. Farmers are doing the same thing and trying to create sustainable farming opportunities. And so trying to find ways that we can feed our future, but do it in a way that is environmentally friendly and taking leadership roles. It's inspiring. And thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. So everybody, we are just so thrilled you could join us tonight and be here with Imani tonight. I think this has just been an incredible presentation. We have another presentation coming up next month, and that one is going to be in June. We are having the next our Common Ground initiative when we are going to be talking and walking common ground. We're going to have Elizabeth Chu from Montpelier, and we're also going to have Maya Davis from Riversdale talking about how their organizations are trying to find ways to connect us with each other, but also working through their descendant communities to try to make that possible. And we have something new. If you look in the offers today, we actually have a link up for our July presentation. Richard Bell is going to be back joining us both in person and live when he's talking about his book Stolen. So many great presentations coming up. Imani, you set the bar high. Hopefully they can match up on this one. And if you like what you've seen tonight, everybody, please consider, you like the work that we're doing, please do consider becoming a member or sign up to get our newsletters. We'd love to keep you in the loop of all the work that's going on. And Miss Imani, we're going to get you down to Sotterley so you can come visit there as well. You got to come see us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for having me. Thank you, everybody, for all your amazing questions and just for your time this afternoon or this evening. So thank you all so much. Go visit our website. Go follow us on social media. And just keep up with us throughout the summer. Keep up with those 11 interns that we have, because we've got a lot of exciting things, some new merch that's coming out this summer. So all those great things too. So definitely follow us and keep up with us.
It was great to see you tonight, Imani. It's great to have everybody joining us tonight. Do remember that this will be coming out. You can rewatch it. If you missed parts, you couldn't take notes quickly enough. It will be coming back out, and you'll be able to see the presentation later. It'll go up on our YouTube page. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Imani. Good night, everybody. Bye.
Yeah.